And he would have been a child who at this point would have gone through the various teaching schools of a very rigorous Jewish people in Galilee. He would have gone through Beth Sefer. Then he would have gone through Beth Midrash. So by the age of 12, any diligent little Jewish boy from Galilee would have been an extremely competent biblical scholar. He also clearly had other gifts that made him remarkable. In spite of the wonder and the power and the joy of that scene of the little boy sitting with those great teachers, Mary responded like any mother would respond in a similar situation, and she said, "Why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been so worried about you." She was angry with him, and rightly so. Jesus responds, and to some extent, maybe he is rebuking his mother. And yet I don't think that the 12-year-old Jesus is being insolent, and he didn't mean to be disobedient. It is just that his hunger and thirst for being in the church and in theological discussion was so overwhelming, he didn't even know that they were leaving. All that he could see was what was in the church. And the answer that he gave to his mother wasn't a smart answer, it was a genuine answer. And he said to her, "Mom," he said, "why did you have to search for me? You should have known that I had to be in my Father's house. There was absolutely no other place that you needed to look." And then the ending of the story is very beautiful in that it says, in spite of the fact that Jesus was so taken with this discussion with the didaskalon, that he then returned down to Nazareth with his parents, and he was obedient to them. The implication that from that point on, and up to that point, he was a model child, being obedient to his parents and respecting them as Scripture demanded. And the very last sentence says that from that point on, he grew in physical stature, he grew in spirit, and he grew in the favor of God. Again, that word, he grew in the charisma, the giftedness of God. And that's the end of the story. Wonderful! What is the point of that story? To some extent, it is an attempt to fill out the childhood of Jesus. We want to know what he was doing between the time he was born and the time he turned approximately 30 and became a teaching rabbi himself, because there's absolutely nothing except for this one little story at 12 years old. We want to know, what was he doing? In fact, some people have written entire Gospels about the childhood of Jesus. For example, in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, Thomas gives a detailed outline of all of Jesus' childhood. Thomas tells some really weird stories of how one day in school, the little children and Jesus had found a little pit of clay. And they were playing with the clay, and they decided to model birds out of clay. And when Jesus modeled a little bird in his hands, he then opened his hands, and the bird flew away. Or there is a story from Thomas of when Jesus was working in his father's carpenter's shop, and Jesus cut a board for something that Joseph was baking. And Joseph said, "No, son, it's too short." And so Jesus held both ends of the wooden board and stretched it out like this. It'd be a wonderful thing if you could do that and you were a carpenter. Elsewhere in the Gospel of Thomas, Thomas speaks of a time when Jesus was playing with the children at school, and one of the children jostled Jesus and hurt him. and Jesus turned and struck the child dead. A somewhat less positive image. But please be aware, the Gospel of Thomas, it is not authoritative, it is completely made up. And it was one man's attempt, much after the life of Christ, to fill out his childhood. The truth is, we do not need to fill out that childhood too much. We know what Jesus was doing because we know what a child would have done in Galilee, in Nazareth, at that time. Now you might think to yourself, he must have been just the perfect child. You can imagine Mary saying to him, Jesus, go and clean your bedroom. And Jesus, of course, would answer, why, yes, Mother. It will be a joy for me to bring order out of the chaos, as I have often done. Eat your vegetables. Yes, Mother. My body is a temple, and these vegetables are worthy offerings to it. Don't think too much about Jesus' childhood, okay? Because you'll start inventing stories like that, or worse, stories like Thomas had. Don't worry about his childhood. The reason we have this story is to tell us something about Jesus' relationship to the church. Some have said that this story, by having those old teachers affirming the teachings of Jesus as a child, is a way of having the church affirm the legitimacy of Jesus. But in fact, the story does the exact opposite thing. It does not have the church affirming the legitimacy of Jesus. It has Jesus, by his very presence in the church, affirming the legitimacy of the visible church on earth. Remember this, God does not need the church. God does not need physical, human structures or institutions by which to do his work. Remember this, that in the time of Jesus, the church was clearly corrupt and broken. It had begun to teach traditions of human beings as if they were the laws of God. So Jesus and God did not need the church. But by going to the church, by sitting with those didaskalon, Jesus was saying, I am going to use the church. I am going to let the church be a part of my mission in this world. And today we celebrate the story of the child Jesus in the temple because it says to us today, God is here. God is here. God is here. And in spite of the fact that we are a broken institution, in spite of the fact that the church is comprised of sinful human beings, God still says, I will use the church, and the church will be the prime source of my word and my healing and my good news in the world today.